Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. I'm so excited to talk with you this morning because we're so pleased with the progress you've made in the last week, especially your engagement of our new themes, neoliberalism and peace journalism. It's been wonderful to see how you've both embraced those concepts and engaged with understanding them with one another, but also how you've been able to apply them to the materials through the week on Syria. So thank you for that. And just a comment again on how grateful we are for the energy and the attention you're giving to the class and the thoughtfulness that you are the thoughtfulness with which you're responding to the material and as always to one another. So just one quick comment on peace journalism. It's easy to make this error, but peace journalism is more than just reporting on peace as opposed to conflict, although that's one dimension of it. It is really, again, about looking at the causes of and also potential challenges to what seems to be the inevitability of violence. So I won't go into a whole commentary again on peace journalism, but just to help clarify that again, it includes but isn't exclusive. It's not really focused on reporting about peace. It's a different, little bit more engaged framework. The other comments we've had is people, another place we've been really pleased is that some of you would preface your remarks around responding to art and artistic representations by saying, I don't know anything about this, I don't know how to do this. And then you, many of you launched into just very thoughtful and insightful comments about not only the art that was represented, but the power of art itself. So once again, thank you for that, and also to just highlight the fact that part of what we're inviting throughout this course is for you to be able to be introduced to and then engage new and fresh ways to think about seemingly intractable challenges. And so art and artistic representation is one strand that I think very few of us in our experience in the world, or certainly in our academic training, have necessarily been exposed to art as a transformational form of expression. And that is what we're inviting your consideration of here. So for those of you who started to feel like, oh, I don't know anything about this, but yet dove right in, that is what learning is all about, and we're so grateful for your willingness to step off into what feels like unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable territory. And then finally, a couple comments. Some of you have understandably raised questions like about, well, how can art make any difference? And this returns or responds back to that larger question that I spoke about at our last office hours, and for my video for the Google and Hangout session that week from last week. That question again of how can small scale or seemingly small scale enterprises and efforts make any difference at all? And I only just want to say art is yet another category of opportunity for people to be responding to, again, in this particular case, terrible acts of violence in a creative and engaging and hopefully illuminating way. That's what art can do, is illuminate dimensions of challenges that we may not otherwise see, or that we may see but aren't necessarily impacting us emotionally. A classic and a common example is that when we hear about conflicts or we hear about challenges, the refugee crisis being, I think, an excellent one, it feels like not only the enormity of it, but also just when we hear about numbers, we hear 65 million displaced persons, we hear, hundreds of thousands of children who have died. We hear these numbers, these stories, which I think always almost always take us aback, and that we may feel moved by or surprised by or deeply troubled by. But there's nothing, I don't think, for me anyway, the power of then what helps remind us that of each of those numbers, this is an individual who's someone. These numbers represent someone's child, someone's parent, someone's partner, someone's spouse, someone's friend. And we all, I know, can relate deeply to that. Those numbers are people with full, rich, integrated lives that impact people in more comprehensive ways than we can ever know. It's yet again another moment where we can't measure the power and the impact of an individual life. It's impossible to measure that, but yet we know from our own experience the incredible impact that people have on us. And so art becomes a way to personalize, to humanize, as our editors commented in the excerpt I chose for you to consider for the Serious Speaks volume. It's art is not only it's humanizing. First of all, art humanizes these sometimes impossible to understand, both the conflicts themselves as well as the numbers that are affected by conflict. The other thing that art does, and I'll just again say this briefly, is that art sparks the notion of creativity and imagination, and the opportunity to think about what does it mean to have what John Paul Lederach, a peace activist and peace theorist, calls the moral imagination. He's not unique in that designation, of course, but what does it mean to imagine possibility instead of probability in terms of human agency and impact? And when we can release ourselves from the confines of probability, which inevitably, if we live in probabilities, our actions for change will be diminished because the probabilities are so profoundly overwhelming. But possibility can inspire and does inspire. And art becomes a vehicle to remind us of possibility and to spark the possibility that moral imagination can generate. So art has many functions. Both in itself, it matters. It can humanize. It can also inspire us to think outside the box in new ways that we might not have otherwise considered. It reminds us of possibility instead of probability. And then finally, especially for people who are victims of these violences, to be able to express oneself artistically is in itself a sense of no against the dehumanizing force that violence evokes. So especially for people who are the victims of violence, to be able to respond artistically is itself, I believe, a profound act of courage as well as of generative transformation for themselves and for others whom also may share those same experiences of violence, and who then can recognize themselves in another who articulates that experience in a way that says that I still live here and I still promote hope in the face of even these devastations. One final comment is that some of you are asking why we're looking at women and looking at questions of gender in the kind of explicit ways that we are. This becomes yet another, if you remember from my earlier, very early, it may feel like a long time ago, my earliest comments about the class, that we're going to have these strands of consideration, gender being one, art being another, looking at kind of these cross sections throughout. And the reason again for this is because they become forms of peace journalism, if you will, frameworks and new ways to think about, again, intractable ideas and conflicts that we don't often hear the voices of artists or hear the voices of women and the roles that they play in relationship to these kinds of challenges. And so the course is intended to help expose us to things that we might not otherwise encounter in other more, in many other arenas of information about the areas that we're addressing. So I hope that that's helpful. I want to thank you again for your just inspiring, truly inspiring to us engagement with this material in this class. And as always, look forward to our consideration this week as we look into and to explore the opportunities, challenges, conflicts, but also incredibly generative forces that that Nigeria and Nigerians are facing. So thanks everyone. I look forward again to following your progress.